Chapter 3. Sunday. Raven sucked in a breath and shot up in bed. Her heart hammered in her chest, and she gazed around the room trying to get her bearings. A dream. It had been a dream. Squeezing her eyes shut, she tried to hang on to whatever remnants of the dream she could, but they were fading fast. Breaking glass, screams, expressions of fear, that was all she could see. She ran a hand across her forehead. This had to stop. She couldn't keep waking up like this every morning. Tonight, she would try sleeping pills. They had always knocked her out when she needed them, and she definitely needed them. Her eyes shifted to the clock. Just 4 a.m.? Should she get up or try to get a few more hours? She wasn't meeting Jason until noon, so there was plenty of time. But she wasn't sure she could quiet her heart enough to fall back asleep. Maybe a little television would help. Raven clicked the remote, and the flat screen came to life. Of course, at 4 a.m, little of interest was on, but that didn't really matter. She just needed something to get her mind off the dream so she could sleep a little longer. Her finger paused as a smarmy-looking man in a suit filled her screen. He was spouting some nonsense about Jesus, filling your empty life. But it wasn't his words that had frozen her finger. No, it was the shadow she thought she saw lurking over his shoulder. Surely it was nothing, some lighting error. But it didn't look like that. The rest of the area behind him was lit up fine. So it must be her. She must be seeing things again. Raven squeezed her eyes shut and counted to 10 before opening them again. When she did, the shadow was gone. Yep, pills were definitely in her future tonight. Trepidation filled Kat as she entered the church early the next morning. What if no one here knew either? She'd spent enough hours poring over the information online to know that even among scholars, there were a lot of different views. The word rapture itself was even debated. It was all too much for her to decipher alone, which was why she had texted Pastor Ron the night before and requested a sit-down with him. Pastor Ron's office was the last office down the long hallway in the administrative wing of the church. His door was open, and he sat behind the desk staring down at a book. Kat couldn't help but notice that he had no computer in the room. Unlike most of the other pastors, Ron was older and more of a traditionalist. With his head of white hair and his full beard, he would often wear red during the month of December, and Kat had heard rumors that he took a few Santa gigs during the month every year. Kat couldn't blame him. He fit her ideal image of Santa to a T, and his kind eyes and gentle nature only added to the perfection. Of course, not everyone in the church found Ron as refreshing as Kat did. Because he was older, he held to more conservative values, and that turned a few of the more liberal patrons off. Enough that he was rarely asked to preach to the main congregation anymore, and instead led the retired group events. Kat didn't care about that, though. What she knew was that the light of Jesus shone through this man every time he talked. Just being around him made Kat want to be a better Christian. If anyone might have the answer she sought, it would be him. She rapped lightly on the doorframe so as not to startle him. "Pastor Ron, do you have a few minutes?" He looked up and broke into a wide smile. "Of course, my child. Come on in. I always have time for you." He motioned to the seat across from him, and Kat pulled out the chair and sat down. The fabric was red and velvety, and it reminded her of the cushion of pews. But it didn't ease her hesitation today. Her nerves still coiled tightly in her stomach. How much should she tell him? All of it? Or just enough to find out what might happen after the rapture? Pastor Ron folded his hands together and stared at her expectantly, clearly waiting for her to speak first, which made sense as she had come to him and not the other way around. Ahem, Kat cleared her throat. He was normally so easy to talk to, but she was afraid he might think her crazy if she said too much. She still found the situation crazy at times. "I was wondering how much you might know about the rapture." "The rapture?" His bushy white brows lifted on his forehead. "Well, while I have studied the book of Revelation, there is nowhere in the Bible where the rapture is clearly mentioned. Most theologians believe that the verse is talking about Christians meeting God in the sky or about the rapture, but no one knows for sure. Even among those who believe in the rapture, there are differing views about when it will occur." Kat knew that all too well. Her computer was an electronic graveyard of theological debate over the rapture and the tribulation. But Micah had used the word, so she had to believe it was true. Okay, well, let's assume it is a real thing. And for the sake of argument, let's say that believers are raptured at the beginning of the tribulation. What happens next? What will the people left behind have to face? His face folded in concern. Are you worried about your salvation, Kat? She shook her head. No, not me, not anymore. But there's a girl I am worried about. How do I convince her that all of this is real? How can I tell her what to look for if we do get raptured? Pastor Ron's kind brown eyes searched her soul, and for a moment Kat thought he was going to ask her for more information. She would have given it, as crazy as it might make her sound, but she was glad when he leaned back and answered her question instead of posing his own. The book of Revelation is challenging, but there are a few things we do know. It is clear there will be wars and famine, and much more death than we are used to seeing. A leader will emerge who will claim to unite the world in peace. He will be the Antichrist, but many will follow his false teachings, as he will probably be very charismatic and charming. At some point, he will require people to take his mark. There is much debate on whether this is an actual mark or just the act of worshiping him. I tend to believe it will be literal, but some disagree. And there will be 2 witnesses who will be killed and then rise again. Kat blinked as she took it all in. Okay, wars, famine, death, a leader, and witnesses? That's all I can give her? It all sounded so vague. How was she going to convince Raven of the coming tribulation when the signs were so ambiguous one could claim they were happening even now? Minus the witnesses, of course. There are other things mentioned, but it is unclear whether they are literal or metaphorical. I don't want you to pass along something as truth that might be a metaphor. He leaned forward and caught her eyes again. You tell your friend to watch for these things. I know they seem vague, but these wars will be unlike any we have seen before. They will be hard to ignore when they begin happening, and anyone who listened and read will understand what they mean. Thank you, Pastor Ron. I'll pass this on to her. A long sigh slipped past Kat's lips. Hopefully she won't be so hard-headed that she doesn't listen. She pushed back her chair to stand, but Pastor Ron stopped her with a hand on her arm. Before you go, can I pray for you? Kat nodded, though the experience of people praying for her still felt odd and unnatural. Still, with what she'd been tasked with, she figured she could use all the help she could get. Jordan wandered into the kitchen, expecting to find Kat staring at her laptop again, but the room was empty. Hello? She called out, in case Kat was in another room, but no return answer came. Where was she? Jordan crossed to the cabinet to grab a bowl for some cereal, and then turned to the fridge for the milk. A note attached to the door gave her pause. It was written in Kat's familiar scrawl. Went to church early to ask Pastor Ron some questions, but I'll swing back by to pick you up by 10. Well, that explained her absence then. Jordan hoped Pastor Ron would have some answers for them. While she was glad to be doing God's work, doing it blind was stressful. Some sort of roadmap or outline would certainly help. After pouring the milk into her bowl, she crossed to the small dinette table and sat down. Kat's kitchen was homey, decorated in a soft mauve color with gold accents, but it still felt empty without her there. Kat had invited her to stay and told her to make herself at home, but that didn't make Jordan feel any less like she was infringing on Kat's space. Jordan bowed her head and closed her eyes to pray, but before she could utter a word, a vision flooded her mind. A baby, wrapped in a blue cloth, lay crying in a crib. A blue bear lay next to him, but no one appeared to be coming to his rescue. Who was this baby, and why was he crying? Suddenly the vision shifted, and she saw a dark shape leaning over the crib. Though she could see no face, the fear emanating from the baby thundered through her body, sending her heart rate through the roof. Her throat constricted, making it hard to breathe, and then as suddenly as it appeared, the vision was gone. Jordan shivered as she tried to make sense of the vision. It was so unlike anything else she had ever seen. There were no words to say, no sins to share, but she felt in her bones that the baby, whoever and wherever he was in trouble. Who is he, God? What do I need to do? But there was no response. She would just have to wait. Perhaps this vision was going to come in bits and pieces like the vision that had led her to Cat had. Hopefully there would be more because she wasn't sure she would rest until she knew that the baby was okay.